Most people don't think of strategy that way.
Developing a new strategy.
Strategic blind spots.
When strategy meets reality.
Strategy and innovations.
In the strategy world.
Drive their strategic goals.
And welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. Welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. I am absolutely delighted to have Joel Grundy with me today. We got introduced from a former guest on here, Matt Mullen. So it's great to have you on, Joel.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Mike. Any friend of Matt's is a friend of mine.
He's not got many friends, so we'll go with that.
We'll get t-shirts.
Before we start, do you mind giving a bit of background about yourself and a bit of context, what you've been up to lately for our guests?
Of course, love to. I'm the head of strategy at a firm called Q5, which is an organisation, we call it Organisation Health Consultancy, which is looking at all the elements of organisations that need to be working well to perform and grow. Obviously, I lead more of the strategy side of that, but that goes all the way through to especially culture and organisation design and change. My background prior to that was before I met Matt, working in the defence industry for a long time, again in a strategy and policy type role, which was fantastic. Real mix there of classic corporate strategy, kind of market engagement with government and policymakers, but then also some incubation, because the joy of being in a big complex conglomerate is there's always something exciting to start. As I'm sure you and people consuming the podcast know, strategists get stuck with this stuff. You have a bright idea sometimes and you have to make it happen, which is great. So that was a fantastic experience. And then my background before that was in a couple bits of government and defence policy and that world. Nice.
So you have quite a unique perspective compared to quite a few of our guests, because quite a few of our guests are, they're what I call the thinkers and, advisors. They advise externally.
Mm-hmm.
They're not always internal. And you spent majority of your time being internal. And as much as external consultants, we have our challenges. And no doubt internal strategists have their challenges. So what sort of, from your experience, definitely being in something as big as Thales, what's your experience about the challenges that strategists face internally in the organisation?
That's a great question. Firstly, absolutely recognise your characterisation. I've been here for 7 years now. I think I can stop saying I'm a recent arrival, but you still always feel that, what do you come up in and what's your base wiring? And my base wiring was being in-house and as you say, being internal and then stepping to being I don't know if it's gamekeeper turned poacher or the other way around now, but yeah, you definitely feel the difference. That said, though, I think the difference is less in strategy than probably in other things, because even in-house strategy, you are to a degree an advisor, because ultimately there are strategy actions, right? Go and work out what M&A you should do and things like that. But by and large, for most organisations, you're about making other people's decisions come together. Investment or tech or people or go to market or whatever it is. So there's probably less difference in this type of work than in other forms of consultancy, because internally you're still trying to assemble a coalition, right? Get everyone on the same page around the big picture balance and get them to see their place in it and play their role. So that advisory piece was kind of always there in this profession. And I'm sure you can wax lyrical about it yourself as well. There's this kind of push and pull inside corporates, or certainly in my experience, both when I was in-house and now advising, I'm sure you see it. It used to be that strategy was quite a big part of like leadership kind of expectation, that it, for good or bad, right? The mid-century thing, which is the CEO should be the great strategist and walk into the office and go, I had a great idea of a breakfast and it's about 3 years from now we're going to be here, right? That was built in. The professionalization of strategy, 60s onwards, I guess, you've kind of now created a discipline around it full of professionals, and in a lot of organizations that's like a function, a dedicated team. And sometimes that means that general management see it as one of the things to think about, right, alongside operations and people and money and all the rest of it. And you kind of, I don't know if that means it's more or less influential, but there was always a thing for me that actually strategy is, and it still see it that way, strategy is very, very close to leadership, right? It doesn't exist in its own magical world of over here. There are some things like bits of enabling functions or even sales where you can kind of just let it run and it can just do a good job and you can see the outputs to some degree. Strategy in the corporate world I was in, if you're not really, really understanding what the balance of decisions is the leadership wants to make, you're really just amusing yourself in a phone box.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And there's a couple of really good things to highlight there. One is rightly brought out the the intertwined relationship between strategy and leadership. You can't separate the two, but people try to. I think this constant obsession of, I'm going to be challenging and call it abdication of responsibility, and they create these things. Now you've got this,
got a process, right?
You got like, you start getting job titles like chief innovation officer, chief morale officer, chief culture officer. And, it's like, well, are we just abdicating responsibility? And then the other part about, you rightly brought up around the professionalization of strategy.
Yeah.
And I've looked at this a lot, and I've really challenged around, when you go back and look at what strategy was about, a way of being, a way of sensing, constantly adapting, know the ground, know the internal environment, the organization. Now we've got to this professionalization. It seems that we've just sort of process it to a factory of outputs.
Yeah.
And that's my big challenge with strategy at the moment.
I think you're spot on, and you and I spoke about this before. There is something about strategy's job is to help you understand and live within the uncertainties of like the big picture, right, around the organization or around what you're trying to achieve. And all the professionalization is a way of understanding and structuring that. You're mapping stuff, or you're analyzing it, or you're doing market forecasts, all that stuff. It is designed to put some structure and grip around things that are inherently unpredictable, uncontrollable. That's why it's outside the organization, not inside the organization. As you say, if you take that too far, the impression can give that it's strategy's job to make those things certain that aren't certain. That your job is to say, because we wrote it down on this 97-page action list as part of the strategy, everyone in the organization can stop looking at the outside world and just get on with delivering this, this mega PMO kind of plan. And I think it is a real risk to say, either falsely claim as strategists that we can wrestle the outside world, right, and put a bridle on it and go, well, here's the correct answer and do this, you'll be fine. Or at the same time, just becoming helpless to it and saying, well, strategist's job is to say, here are market trends, cross your fingers and pray, let's go, right? It's finding that what's the right level of agency to take in there and give the business, as you say, rather than infantilize the business. Yeah.
And I think, it doesn't take me long to go into an organization and go, really challenge, like, what has informed your decisions?
Yeah.
And I'm often surprised about how little the external environment or what the organization's actually capable of now has informed the decision, rather than what I call just aspiration. It's our aspiration is to be this. I'm like, that's fantastic. I wish to be, 20 kilos lighter, but it ain't gonna happen.
I hear that.
I say that as I breathe in.
I know. I hear you. Yeah, I think it's the easiest thing in the world, and really bad strategies. And this is where, as you say, this is the difference between living and breathing a strategy mindset, a strategy set of decisions, and owning the entrepreneurship of that, right? The risk taking in it, versus an output which anyone can produce. It's got a picture of a tree on the front. There's a nice, expansive first couple of pages that say, in 10 years, we will be a critical part of whatever, national infrastructure, the circular economy, people's daily lives, blah, blah, blah. Then you skip all the complicated stuff and at the end go, and we'll do this by moving two bodies from like sales Brazil to sales Guatemala, right? The skipping of all of that really difficult layer in the middle. And it's something we talk about as a firm. So forgive me, I won't do corporate stuff for the fun of it, but we talk about the art and science, right? You need the science to say what is actually true, right? As far as one can tell, what's true in the market, what have we learned through experiments and innovation stuff, like what's true in our performance, all that stuff. But you cannot skip the fact that in the middle, there's a few big bets. There's usually 4 or 5 big calls that you're asking leadership to make. Somewhere in between, we'd like to be very customer-centric and innovative. Great, so would we all, and 20 kilos lighter. And next week, budget does this, right? In between that, you're asking people to make pretty big bets, which are going to be as much art as they are science. And I think strategist's job is to help the people who ultimately have to make those decisions, help them to inform that and give them good options and give them thinking and insight into those, but also to help them be comfortable with what they're doing in that space, right? Help them be comfortable with the risk, what it's going to take from them as leaders, make sure they've heard from the people they need to hear to. But I do see it very, you're in the confessional booth, right, of saying you're going to have to make this call as a leadership individual or teams, and how can we help you?
Yeah. I think there's a lot, people get a bit hepped up on the uncertainty of it all. I know. Yeah. And I've had this before. I've been in rooms and leaders have asked me a question. How do we know this is going to work? And it's like, well, like you said, we're hedging bets here. We don't know it's going to work, but we can really look at some questions beforehand, like, you know, if we took this, would it still give us options?
Yeah, for sure.
You know, I think that's crucial. It still gives us options there, and it's also about, this is where the, you know, external environment, the other actors are involved, and we need to start treating them more as intelligent actors that are conscious. They have their own agendas, their own wills, rather than we seem to think that they're just benign things that will move to our will. And we can ask that of, like, if we do this, what is the likely response going to be?
Exactly.
Who from? And how can we tell? And you can start to, this is where you start to bring that orientation, that sensing in, because we're going to start looking for this thing.
Absolutely. One of the most brilliant strategists I was lucky to work for early in my career always said that you know, the worst thing you can do is compare your tomorrow with somebody else's today, right? So you say, I've taken this picture of the world. Currently it looks like this, you know, current trends continue, then we die. And what we're going to do is change ourselves here, 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 and here. And we're going to be streets ahead in 3 years' time. We're seeing it a lot at the moment. We're seeing it with a lot of companies in AI, right? Which is, what is the degree of change I feel comfortable with in my business with AI? Because it's like letting off a firework inside the business, right? If I chuck all my data at this thing, what am I doing to my people? What am I doing to my customer facing stuff, all that stuff? But if you don't start, it's a professional kind of nerd thing. I really, really dislike doing market landscapes today, right? If you're doing a proper bit of work in strategy, my question is always, right, and exactly as you said, sit there and play for me, major competitor or regulator or whoever, right? Give me the next 3 years. I don't know if you're a fan of, I'm an NFL fan, which is a terrible confession to make as niche sports go in the UK. But they often do the kind of mock draft thing, right? Draft's coming up, you're going to pick players, and they get people representing each of the teams to do the war game thing and go, given who I am, what do I need? So that you're not sat there thinking purely from my perspective. You've actually got real live, you know, you've got real live opponents. And I think if you're not thinking, how is that going to change over the next 3 years? What's that going to do to expectations? One of the big things is, we've seen it a lot. We do a lot of work in media, and the things that affect customer experience, right? What readers expect, what they're prepared to pay for, is as much formed by what they're doing with TV, what they're doing with apps and games, as it is your direct competitors in media, because that's just their lived experience. And in 3 years' time, AI will be here in their professional lives, and therefore they'll expect it to be here in their personal lives, even though it's not on your roadmap at all. So I think you're spot on. You've got to do everybody's tomorrow and throw a banana at the moving target. Boomerang, banana, throw at the moving target. But from a leadership perspective, that's another degree of uncertainty. You're asking me to place big bets. I don't know if they're going to work out. And you're also telling me the things I can see around me today may not be there or may be different when that bet comes to fruition, right? That the people is such a big part of this job, and getting them comfortable with that.
Yeah, it's difficult. And it's like, even when you talk about the media, you wouldn't have thought at one stage that the competitor to the BBC and people like that was going to be short clips on YouTube. And short and TikTok. You know, that's how people are consuming their media now. And I see it even with my children. They'll sit there and they'll scroll through short clips on YouTube. They've rarely ever watched channels 1 to 4 like we used to.
Oh no,
and that's the challenge. So I always say that the strategy will emerge from the relationship between the external environment, and I'm including the futures into where regulations and futures, the actors, who are the actors and what they do and what's our relationship to them, and what are we capable of? What are our own forces, our internal organisation capable of? And that is a lot to bring in and trying to sense make for a person to try and understand.
Yeah, spot on. I think sense make is exactly the right phrase. I mean, and I'm positive at the moment. I don't know if I'm positive about the world, but positive about the role strategy plays, because there's so much instability and there's so much crossover between things that previously would never have affected your strategic forces, right, externally, but it's coming from left field, right? I mean, business conditions being tough with the US and people suddenly corporately, not just in like a personal political way, but like corporately saying, hold on a minute, our trust factors have gone down a bit here in how the US is going to operate as a business environment, right? You never would have seen that coming 5-6 years ago. And it affects things in a really unusual way. It's not just pricing or supply chain. It's actually kind of trust that whether I put information through these platforms, because at some point, it might do stuff I don't want it to, and immigration and all that stuff. So I think it's a really, really important time for strategy to be done well. And as you say, to take a factor like trust, which in most, in benign times, you hope that isn't a huge factor in most businesses, right? Consumer trust and systemic trust. And suddenly now it's a big, big, big deal, right? From a personal standpoint, as an employee, from a personal standpoint, as a customer, and from a national standpoint. So in my lifetime, this is probably the most important time for strategy to be done well for a lot of people and in a lot of ways, because of the need for sense making on such a broad scale.
Yeah. And you start seeing the shift, because business schools now, I was looking at business schools and stuff, and they started to slowly or quietly move towards talking about complexity as a science, and introducing that into their programs, where before they weren't. And now you can see, and I really agree with your point about this is the time that we really need strategy.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping it's a paradigm shift away from like the strategy we're talking about, and the strategy unfortunately pervades most organizations, which is this very static,
mechanical.
Right, this is our this is our winning aspiration. Here's what we're going to do in a step-by-step linear approach, and we're now just going to hand that over to the PMO, and the PMO are going to then try and hold people to account, and those people who've been held to account have just sort of been thrown.
It is. I mean, I think if you can, it's a cavalier thing to say, right? If you can put me to an organisation where that's currently working, I'll pay my own money. I remember, when I was at Thales with Matt, we used to, it was a huge avionics business, right? The civil aviation business. And 10 years ago, let's go back pre-2016, right? So 11 years ago, in the benign times we all remember vaguely, you do a lot of work with people like Airbus or Boeing or that civil aviation world. And they used to have such confidence in the market forecast, and rightly so, because for that long period of peacetime, economic peacetime as well as kind of geopolitical, there was a direct relationship between GDP growth, international trade growth globally, passenger miles therefore travelled, and therefore how many twin aisles you need, how many single aisles you need. So there used to be this fantastically stable strategic environment which goes, we can predict demand pretty accurately, we can predict travel patterns pretty accurately, and we've got quite a lot of control of the forces that emerge from that. They're predictable-ish. They're relative. I'm doing a disservice to the really good Airbus strategists and the rest of it. But ultimately, you are playing with some variables to say, where do we want to inject things for efficiency or optimization within that stable external forces environment, more or less? That was the most stable industry that I ever worked in terms of its predictability and that sort of thing. And that was true for a long time. And then COVID blew the industry up, right, in about 1,500 different ways. And then the same things happened with health. The same thing demographically is happening to all kinds of kind of financial services areas. That's before we get to AI. We had the same thing with the entire kind of strategic industries around energy, defense, nuclear infrastructure has been completely changed in the last 4 years because Russians offside become bad actor, and suddenly the system we built becomes very problematic. So, I mean, if you can find me an industry that's genuinely doing well now by just going, right, last year plus 5% based on controlling our own forces and getting the PMO to crank a bit of cost out, do you know what I mean? Speed up or slow down the product iteration pipeline. That's a great life, and I best of luck to you. But I suspect it's in the minority now for most major corporates. If you're not planning for being surprised, you will probably be surprised, I think, right now.
Yeah. And it comes back to the classic tension that organisations face between change and status quo.
Yeah.
And, it's that status quo is really alluring because it's good, it's safe. We've got this and we've got this product and we're going to make it as efficiently as possible. But then it becomes so alluring that they forget the other side of the tension, which is the change. And, you should always have that one eye on what's actually happening, what's changing, and
100%.
giving yourself that spare capacity to adapt.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
like you said,
No, I was going to say spare capacity is the phrase. And like, on the one hand, it's tough because strategically we're just not in a scenario in most industries where you can optimize down to the 0.2%, right? We're just not in that efficiency era right now. and that's the way it's going to be. And investors have adjusted, I think, mostly their expectations, you would hope. We're seeing a lot exactly what you're saying, right? Which is you can't do status quo, which was last year I had 100,000 people, next year I'll have 102 or 98 and just crack on. But you can't create instability and chaos within your own organization in addition to there being instability and chaos in the outside world, because you're trying to then juggle 76 things, half of which are on fire. Yeah. So I'm seeing more and more, slightly anecdotal recency bias, but we're doing a lot more work that's around either core competencies or core assets, which is the interpretation of this commercially in pricing or in market access or in clients or in some of the external points is going to wax and wane, and you're going to have to be agile and strategically minded agile rather than just like agile. But the consistency in the business has to come from what are our core assets. Is it, industrial plant, and that's a thing, we need to optimize that, but that's a real source of like enduring value, and we know that it generates value, and how we mesh it to the complex world is the art. Is it a particular group of people and scarce skill set that we can protect? And like, we see that when you work with people in creative industries, ultimately, if you've got that, do you know what I mean? If you've got the Pixar guys and the rest you can deal with, and or is it that you just have a platform and a product and you're thinking on that business model is so far ahead and that's the asset? But it's a much less efficient, perfect translation of that value to the outside world. And that's where the spare capacity has to exist. That's where the management mindset has to be there now to be less efficient and less optimized, but more responsive.
Yes. And that really comes to really understanding what you are and who you are as an organization. And this is the thing that I've always been battling with recently with, I call it the organizational disassociation that leaders have. So they have like this self-created view of the world of what they are. It's one that they project out that sounds very nice and aspirational and purposeful. Yeah. It's disassociated to what they actually are. And I always say this, like I was with an organization helping them, and they manufactured doors, like really good doors. And that was cool because someone in the external environment, or a lot of people in the external environment, want those doors, and that's cool. So you don't need to pretend you're something else, because that's what you are. Yeah. Okay. And that's the capability you have.
What you're great at.
Yeah, that's what you get. And then once you understand that, you understand what are the core capabilities you need, what the core assets you need, what's all that. And once you know that, you can then discern what's available to you in the external environment for change. Sure. Once you understand your dispositional state, you can then go, right, what's afforded to me now for us to adapt and be able to keep that viability and that advantage. But my problem is people go, well, like I always bring up Lloyds Banking Group because it's fun, but they got a purpose which is help Britain prosper. That's not what you do. Like, get back to what you do.
Get back to what you do. I mean, that's a tough gig. So there's a couple of things in there. I mean, it's something that you have to try and help people get on board with. There's also degrees of strategy. Again, when you're in peacetime and you don't really need it, it's easy to think of strategy as communications, right? It's what you say to the business or the market or customers. I'm sure we've all been in those versions of that, which is everything's being written for how that's going to sound to people, right? And that's usually pretty bad strategy. You have to be comfortable to say there is a group of decisions. Whoever you want in that room is fine, and whoever's accountable and whoever you trust. But those things have to be real, as you say. They have to be unflinching. You can't do it without a really great diagnostic that's true and real, and it can have interpretation. But it's who are we and what we're good at and what's the reality of that. Translating that into a leadership communication, classically in a strategy, not every part of the business is going to be important at any given time. But you don't go out in communications and go, to be honest, right now, support and maintenance, we could care less, right? It's all about new business, right? You're not going to do that. So there's always the translation. And I think it is really important to make clean decisions, as you say, in a very objective, as best you can, objective, business-centric way, and then think about the guidance and shaping of people and what they need to do their jobs well, and what you need to communicate to the market and all that stuff. I think those are two different conversations, 100%. Yes. What's interesting for me, though, is back to exactly what you're saying, which is once you understand your core competence is door making and you're brilliant at it, and there's an enduring market for that, and you know that customer, and that's the thing, right? That's the entrepreneurship of this business. There's still such a lot of room on top of that to make choices. That's not a sentence. I mean, we've got a great partner company in France that we work with, and the way that culturally they approach strategy, because that's the way that their customer base thinks, and there's a cultural piece there, which is it's still quite philosophical. Once you understand the asset and the business and the value generation, you do go to identity, and you do go to some of those bigger pieces about its contribution. Whereas in the UK, maybe there are industries that just go straight to the trading, right, to the arbitrage, because that's the history of London in particular. You go straight to, right, what can I do with that to leverage it? And you express it differently. There's still room for all that personal choice and leadership and interpretation. But exactly as you say, what is the underlying truth of who we are in a room with the people who we can have that conversation, looking in the eyeballs of and be really crisp about it is...
Yeah.
It's more important than ever, because there's just too much chatter and narrative in the world to get distracted by the moment.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I've got nothing wrong with, people taking a more philosophical view, and that's cool. But it has to be based on reality of the situation, and I think that's really cool, like really important. And I always look at, it's I have a very view around viability and advantage. Once you understand yourself, your identity as an organization, what you do, then strategy is about the pursuit of viability and advantage. How do we maintain viability? That's not just profit. It could be profits. It could be, you see a lot in strategy. People confuse strategy with effects. So they go, we're going to have X amount of profit. We're going to, delight our customers. We're going to, or increase our customer base by 10%. Or we're going to, have increase our employee engagement or whatever. All the stuff that you see on these pillars they have. But a lot of these are effects.
Yes.
They are, they're not continuing. And I suppose that comes back to your point earlier about this whole messy bit in the middle that we sort of skip past. And it's sort of like we go to the effects, but we don't actually tell you, okay, so how?
Yeah.
How are you going to do that?
Yeah, and that's part of it.
It's often missing.
Couldn't agree more. And I think there's, there's the danger of strategists, right? The answer is always, it's complex. But there are layers to what are the outcomes you're aiming for, right? There are some really big picture ones, as you say, and that's different now than it was pick a period ago, right? Because where the answer might once have been just the P&L, especially for a public listed company, just the quarterlies, just EPS or whatever, cash or whatever it is. The reality is now, if you're not factoring in resilience to some degree, right? Whether it's energy resilience or supply chain or interest rates go up and do a funny dance, all that stuff. Most organizations now have got a few more things in that top bucket of what are the big things we're aiming at. And then you've got a couple of layers below that. There are, measurable KPIs are really important. Operational KPIs are really important. They help you understand how to make the decision. And then the reality is most people in the organization are going to need those to translate what on God's green earth you're saying in your big bet word. Do you know what I mean? In the strategy kind of space, they need you to translate that and go, the KPI we're asking for is we want an account mix of this by next year or whatever it is. But that's not the decision-making layer. That tactical operational KPI set has to go up into kind of what are those kind of management judgments? What are the questions that we think are material versus those where we just take what comes? And how do they add up into the 3 or 4 big things that really do matter strategically for this business, right? There is a relationship between those different levels of granularity. And again, finding a process, because you have to have process to some degree, right? You have to tell people how they're going to play a role or what's the sequence of decision making and everything else. But those things are becoming more bespoke now, I think, probably than they were 10 years ago. People don't just install the process as much as they used to. We're getting a lot of really interesting work from people saying, I get that we've got a budget process. I get that we've got the MDs of all the countries and regions send in a PowerPoint in September saying prospects for our business, all the rest of it. But how do I go through that messy stage, right? What's the right thing for our business, given the bits we need to focus on? And that it's a very military thing, which belays my background with a bit of defense in it, but shaping that capability to make the decisions as well as supporting the decisions is really close together for me in strategy and putting people on the pitch in the right way.
This has been before we came on the call. I was penning an article about this very thing actually, but I was talking about the powers in the interpretation. Yeah, so like,
Okay.
you know, when you're in that situation, we can create the greatest strategy we want, and we can have all the comms teams lined up to do the PowerPoints and narratives and all this stuff. And I think that's where we get to, and I think traditionally is just that, right, we've got this vision statement, or wherever you've got, and we get the comms team out and they just amplify the message. And actually, if more that we can be clear, and you see this, and you've probably been in the rooms like I have, where they're arguing about, you know, should it be this word or that word, you know, all
adjective soup. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And but I think and what's more important now is the interpretation more than the message. How do we make that space so that I can give you my intent? I'm military, as everyone knows, so, you know, I'm going to give you my intent, and I'm going to give you that space to interpret what I've actually asked you to do. What's your current context? And it increases that judgment. But it's not just a case of I'm going to go away and then tell you what you want to hear. It's a bargaining. It's a resource bargaining. It's a challenge where you go, I know what you want, but for me to do this, I need this, or I need this constraint moved, or, you know, actually, you got this, but how about we thought about it and we do it this way?
Yeah. And it can be the hardest thing. Yeah, it can be the hardest thing. I mean, we do a bit of work when you're supporting people and saying, you know, how do we have a strategic mindset, right, is one way that gets expressed, right? I've got this leadership team. They're not really stepping up. You know, they're all just micromanaging how they got here. They got here because they're a great salesperson. They got here because they're a great, you know, ops person. And all they're really doing is they're sitting at a bigger table for an afternoon a week, and then they go back and micromanage what they know. And so how do you get them to step to exactly as you're saying? Your job now is to some extent to frame things, to frame the balance of outcomes, to give enough steer and enough red lines or enough like foot on the tiller here and here that your team can then operate and go and focus and interpret and do it the right way. And you've got to learn that it's not necessarily about telling them what you would do all the time. It's about giving a perspective from just where you are, and then they're going to come at it from where they're at. And it's fascinating, you know, especially in different cultures, that is very, very different. And I think there is a real danger, as you said, in mechanical strategy process, which is we figured it out, the industry, which by the way is largely American-based and or a bit of European-based systems thinkers with complex brains who like, do you know what I mean, like spreadsheets or whatever it is. It can't be, we figured out the right answer for communicating strategy and translating it for you. That doesn't work at all. Yeah. And when you work with really good leadership teams, they are starting from not necessarily what do people want to hear, like I tell everybody it's going to be milk and honey. Do you know what I mean? You're going to have a really easy life. What's the way I need to communicate this so people can hear? I did a bit of work. It was an amazing company last year, Japanese company, who really just wanted to talk about a really good unpack of visioning, values, mission, purpose, those kind of corporate identity pieces. Because where they needed to take the company, their view was they've got lots of really good managers who can interpret the facts and figures, who can interpret the changes to process or people, and they can do the manager level stuff if you tell them what we're aiming at. And what we're aiming at is about who we as a company and how do we relate to customers and all those things. Now, it can't be the waffly, as you say, be really innovative and put a man on the moon. It has to have it was a really cool piece of work because it was like, how do you put real bones into that help them make decisions, but doesn't sound like, here's your budget, here are your KPIs, come back when you've succeeded.
Yeah, and I think that's crucial. I think that identity piece, really what it means about purpose, because I challenge purpose a lot all the time. You know, I haven't got to go far on my writing to figure out I'm not a fan of it. But I'm not a fan of, I'm a fan of purpose, is in the sense that this is what we do by means of how and why we exist. And sometimes that's really difficult, especially for more established organizations, because you're not like startups have got a great opportunity to do it right, because they're unburdened by past decisions and you know, path dependency and all that stuff. But their purpose of a startup isn't just something that they just fancifully make up. It's because they've been created, or they created themselves for a reason, and that reason is because they found somewhere in this ecosystem or this external environment in which they belong.
And I spot. Sorry.
No, yeah, and I said that's where I think that's where I'm starting to see organisations go back to, and hopefully are moving towards, rather than this sort of Simon Sinek sort of version of it, which is a bit, not great.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think it comes back to something you said earlier. There's nothing wrong with a purpose, and single product businesses are great for this, right? Startups are great for this. You know, we are here to serve London with the absolute best donuts in the market, right? Is not a bad purpose. It's, as you say, we know who we are. There's some choices you can make off the back of that. And that's obviously a ridiculously facetious example. But when you're almost based around that value exchange, we know who we are. We know what value that has. We know what we want to do with it, and we're going to drive that until the wheels fall off, right? That kind of purpose can be very inspiring. I mean, it's tough because you'll get to a certain point where the business starts going, well, I also want to do schnitzel. But that unifying, that then becomes focus, right? As you say, it's not third or fourth order implications that, well, if London has donuts, it will be energized and go to work. So our job is to help the British economy have energy. No, it's not. It's to serve great donuts to people in London. So there's a real leadership judgment in there about how to use things like purpose. And indeed, it's true more broadly with strategy, right? You've said the magic word earlier, which triggers me, which is pillars, which does my head in, because pillars normally just means buckets to throw all the stuff in. It never means prioritization and focus. But all of these tools can be used for good or for bad, right, in strategy terms. You can have a really, really good PMO plan, and you can have a really bad one that just doesn't prioritize, doesn't make any trade-offs, doesn't judge anything, and just says, I'm going to spread the pain equally and take 1% off everyone's pet projects and crack on, right? That's not strategy. That's just having everyone have a pillar. It's a lazy thing to say, but you don't do it once. It's a sequence, but it is all about just that constant set of judgments and prioritizations all the way through the process. And that's daunting, and that takes a certain set of leaders to do it well. And it takes continuous improvement for us as well. When I was in-house, certainly, as well, we were always very conscious of not just sitting here going, well, we know enough about how to do a process and therefore we've got it nailed. It's a bit of a journey. And I think we're all, I'd be interested to see how well in a few years we think we all did at this time, where we all went from thinking we were pretty good at, as a profession, right, strategist as a discipline, and the world has now come and said, right, let's see. Let's see
how it meets reality.
Yeah, go on, big boots, see how you get on. So but there's a lot of that around at the moment.
It's right as well, because like you think about, you said earlier, we might decide you want to do pretzels, but your identity will adapt. It has to, of course, because you couple with the external environment. And Netflix is a classic example, because they started off as Love DVD. And now look at them; they're now a content, not just a content provider. They create
films in
content
cinemas.
Yeah. So, and that's a choice that they've made. They've made that through, as we're talking about strategy. They're constantly observing, orientating, adapting,
absolutely,
to those opportunities that are presented to them, and then they take those. It's like Nvidia as well, a classic example of that. They started off as gaming chips, and now they're the backbone for AI. So it does happen, but I think what we've talked about, like, nicely, and you've been really, really great at articulating this, is that there are choices, and they're difficult choices, and all these choices, like you said to Nvidia, you're doing pretty well, as a gaming thing. We're now going to go and we're going to move over here and be this. That's a big bet.
It is, and you mentioned Netflix, so just because it's a real decision you can see them making right now. So, on one respect, and it's one of those things. Strategies, when you're right, it was obvious, and when you're wrong, you were an idiot who was crystal ball gazing and gets caught. Right, that's how it works. So we tend not to venerate great strategic thinking that well in our business environment. But the decision that Bob Iger made with Disney, and I talk about this a lot. Like, all our teams here are really bored of hearing me talk about it. But that decision they made a few years back, where Disney was being constrained by the fact that it couldn't generate all the stories anymore. Like, go back into the middle of the century, and all the big stories are coming out of Disney. So they built this huge business, and then eventually they just ran out of IP. So they went on the buying spree, bought Pixar, bought Marvel, bought Star Wars, and they just said, we've got to change our identity, exactly as you're saying. We are actually a scaling engine, and we're going to have to buy really, really good content houses, right? Really good creative houses. And Netflix have been on that same journey, where for a while there, when sort of a bit having a grip on the distribution, via streaming and that model, and you had enough eyeballs and you could grow it, and it was all about volume of users and all that stuff. And they're now coming to the point of saying, as you say, we've now not only got to get into content, but there's not enough of it out there that isn't owned by one of our competitors who've also got a streaming service. So we're going to have to go buy it. So the deal they're trying to do at the moment, where they buy Warner Brothers Discovery, which is one of those huge big business deals books will be written about, right? It's barbarians at the gate for the 20s, is because they're having to go on that same journey Disney did, where Disney had the distribution and parks and merchandise and all that stuff. Netflix in the same position where they've got the distribution, they've got the eyeballs, but if they're making the strategic bet to not sit on that and say, if we don't keep feeding that with really high-end IP, so Warner Brothers would give them whatever it is, Batman, Harry Potter, whatever the other things are. But if we don't keep feeding them with that, we won't be viable in your terms, right, in your language. But it would have been so easy if you were just looking at as you say, if we're just looking at, we're a distribution company, that's kind of what we do, that seems fine. Let's buy some other distribution pieces and just kind of sit in our hole. It's really interesting to watch them in real time with all, I mean, you can imagine the pressure of their earnings calls and everything else with the amount of money that their investors are generating that they expect. But they're taking that punt in real time. And it's fascinating to see. And again, we'll only know in hindsight.
Yeah.
Watching people take big bets from those kind of positions is fascinating to me.
And it's great to see, and you see it out real time. I'm the same. My wife rolls her eyes as I talk about strategy, and go, "Oh, did you see this?" But it's the same. It's the same in the sense of the big producers were based in America and UK, but now Netflix has opened it up. So now you've got competing from Japan, Nordic. Nordics are doing fantastic, but that was never an opportunity before. But now they can subtitle it all for us and change the language just like that for us. We're consuming it. But I'm less excited when I look at people like Apple, because I just think they're just safe, and I think they're too safe in the fact that they're making, vast amount. And I say this, they're making vast amounts of money.
Not starving.
They're not starving. It's the same thing, isn't it? They're not doing anything different. It's just the same bit. They're a bit like in what we're talking about Boeing at the moment. They're in that sense where they can probably predict that, but I can't see them doing that bit where they're going, well, where's the next part we're going to need to move to?
Right. And I think this completely agree with that. And Apple is in the classic victim of its own success, which is great because you own your verticals, right? You've got to fight Samsung to death every year or two about foldable or not foldable, but they've got a good playbook for, we always want to be 18 months behind, but doing the premium experience, right? They did the play into services and the revenues from that, which I suspect quietly is doing really good business. They've gotten over the odd hump of tech obsolescence, but it must take so much effort, to your point, and core competence to sustain the iPhone business, right? And to keep enough going in the software world that you can sell a few laptops and sell a few iPads and all that stuff. It might be that they've made a really great conscious choice that trust is the big one that they've got, and now the world's going to come back to them because as everyone falls out of love with the oligarchy in California and selling everyone's data, that they'll ride those upswings. They might have made that a 10-year play, or it might just have been, as you say, that they never found any big bets that they liked enough. Because there are always things floated around, right? Were they going to buy, I think Disney was on at some point, were they going to build a car company, all this stuff. I suspect the problem is you're so big that to have a dent in the company, to have an impact positively, you've got to place a bet that's so damn big and so risky and so expensive. You're going to have to reshape the world in some way or another. On top of that, they've had to move all the chips, or they're having to do a ton of work to move chips so they're not solely dependent on things that the Chinese might or might not disrupt. I'm sure there's a load of stuff under the hood that comes with being that size and scale. But at the same time, we're seeing it again in defence a little bit at the moment. It's a fantastically interesting time in the defence industry because, sadly, these are less stable times. And there's going to need to be a rearmament in Europe especially. And the technology is at a point where all of those same expectations that you're talking about, people are expecting Silicon Valley type ways of working. People are expecting the technology to be able to work that way and have that level of agility and flexibility and And we're seeing private equity get involved in the industry in a much more significant way than it has done before, and private money. We're seeing Silicon Valley people leave the world of making really great apps for blah and coming into thinking about decision support systems in the battlefield, right? That's phenomenal. We need the money, we need the talent, all that stuff in that industry. But the question of, if you're a big company, much like, the Apple equivalents in defense, are you going to take the bet of de-verticalizing and going,
Yes.
I've got this thing where I make something that flies, drives, swims and shoots, and I know my supply chain and I've got control of the whole thing and I'm an integrator in that whole thing. Are you really going to de-verticalize and go, right, well, we assume the market will provide now in whatever, mission systems or support or any of these things? Are you really going to take that risk and say, let's, and Apple's the same, right? Are they going to really let other people into their world and say, fine, we'll just do this bit now and give up our control over the whole stack? That's a really hard call to make, and I've only ever seen it done a couple of times well.
Yeah, because you've got like the big ones like Lockheed Martin, and they got what's the new Warrior? What do they call it? What's the new Warrior that they there's a new
Ajax,
that's it. Yeah.
General Dynamics. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, is it General Dynamics? Yeah. Sorry, not Lockheed Martin.
Okay.
So apologies, Lockheed Martin. Don't sue me yet.
I have no shares in either. You're okay.
But General Dynamics, they must be worried at this point strategically, because they've tried to make Ajax and it's a long program that's gone way over budget, and it's not fit for purpose. Where if you look at the demands and this is where we're talking about holding the difference in tensions, the external environment, the actors, our own organization. Yeah. If you look what's happening in Ukraine, it's fast.
Yeah, it is.
It's like they're not waiting around for a $3+ billion, pound tank to come out and, wait 5-6 years for that to happen. They need something quick that is going to make an effect, and it's all about effect. So what effect do we need to achieve, and by which means are we going to have that effect? What are we going to use to make that effect?
Spot.
Yeah, and I think that's where the defense companies are going to be challenged.
It is, and the Ukrainians aren't hanging around waiting for us to come up with the answer either. The center of gravity in the industry is there now in some areas, certainly drones and counterfires and things like that. But what you see, and it's always the case in wartime, it's the same when Britain's been in those kind of environments. There's such tight integration between the operator, the user, and the designer and the manufacturer, because the reality of defense, right, is you can't outsource the rest of the industry. You can say to the industry, I need kit X, but you need the other D-LODs and all the other stuff that we all know and love. That's still always going to be held by the professional forces and those who are using the kit. And we separate those because we separate those in our system. But market forces get in the way of that ultimately, right? And there's good reasons for that, and you want that for reasons of efficiency and anti-corruption and all of those good things. But I think we are going to start waiting for market forces and the evidence of what happens on the battlefield, and then how that plays back through the system of actually that doesn't work and we need another one, or we need it to do this, we need to change it, all those things. Or trying to foresee it 20 years out and write a requirement that says in 20 years I'm going to need something that has feature top, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Both of those systems are too slow. And historically, and it's not necessarily what Adam Smith would want, but historically, what you tend to see is much more joint thinking and direction. So the US famously had it at about the turn of the century, when the then, I think it was an undersecretary of industry or whatever it was, the sort of sub-cabinet person, Min State in our system, sat down with all the big defense companies and went, right, this isn't working. You're all fighting with each other. You're too small, blah, blah, blah. And they had this famous last dinner where he said, right, you two are going to do fighter jets and compete with each other, but it's you two. You out, you out. You two are going to do the boats, right? You out. And they did a bit more conscious strategic design of what they needed industrially. And obviously in wartime, that stuff happens as well. You go, right, action this day. I now want, I want Mulberry Harbour's made. I'm not putting it out to tender. Get on with it.
Yeah.
I think we saw that with UORs in the Afghanistan kind of era a little bit. And I think we're now getting much closer, and it's a real organisational, cultural, strategic challenge. But getting back to that point where we understand that risk is owned together, and there's going to need to be a little bit more of a strategic intent jointly, because otherwise the other mechanisms that we've evolved to balance those different outcomes are going to fall short on time, and they're going to fall short on scale.
And I think when you look at other industries, you can see similar challenge that needs to happen, like in, with the amalgamation of GBR in the rail industry. They're going to need to do something similar in the sense of different challenges. Again, this really comes back to thought of the real challenge of a strategist, the real sensing, sense make, try to understand, reorientate. Let's do something. Let's see how that reacts. Let's do, and we need that. We need less of the production.
I think that's there's got to be Network Rail call it the rail industry in the UK call it the guiding mind. It's been the great debate over this whole kind of period for Great British Rail, Network Rail, which is where's the guiding mind? Because ultimately, for good or bad, you do need that strategic kind of thinking and decision making center. There are big bits of it who need to be really production and just run and run and run. But in rail, it's because of the integration of all the different things, and it generally shows up in the schedule and all that stuff. But I think you're right. And it's certainly a bias we have in the Anglo-Saxon kind of way of thinking about it. We want the market forces to be the guiding mind too often, right? We'll try some, and this was, I won't get on my hobby horse, but this was the great fallacy about you don't need a strategy, just be agile. What that means is do stuff, let the real world decide if it's good or bad, then respond. Great. That works really well for a whole bunch of stuff, right? If you're doing a t-shirt startup, right, and selling stuff online, that's great. But where that is not going to work for you, because in defense, you don't want the real world to have a vote, really. You don't want to find out the hard way. And in rail, that's going to create an almighty mess because it's too complex and you can't fall down that way. And in aviation, you need the resilience. I think the return of that guiding mind and saying, have we got that performing at a really high level? And is everyone else comfy with the role that it's going to play? Because if I'm an MD going, well, I run my business and people come to work for me and I don't want some strategist in group, and the CEO telling me what to do. It's like, yeah, but there's got to be some understanding that there is that guiding mind somewhere. Yeah, but that's easy for us to say.
Yeah. I think that's the real intriguing challenge, and it comes really back to Sun Tzu and his idea of shaping. He didn't shape. He didn't allow. He had that capacity, like he said, to adapt to what was happening in the external environment. But his thing was about how do I understand the ground? How do I get it so I can shape it rather than being shaped? And I think too many people are, like you said, the Anglo-Saxon thing, are quite happy to be shaped rather than shaped.
I think that's right.
Or shaping rather than shape. Yeah.
I think we also don't. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think the other Anglo-Saxon thing, and it does come down to how to do the job well, is we don't like people who put themselves on a pedestal. And it's really easy in this, when you're working at that level of elevation, right, and trying to see the whole thing and to take agency and shape it as well, and all those, and pull it all together. It's really easy for that to bleed into arrogance or high-handedness or, living in an elevated world and an ivory tower and all that stuff. And I think it is something that I'm certainly very mindful about, which is it's just another activity in the organisation. It's not more or less important than looking after people from a pastoral standpoint. Certainly less important than that, I would argue, sort of morally. It's not more or less important than facing customers and doing a good job of understanding them. It's not more or less important than doing the research and technology. Do you know what I mean? I think it's going to become more of a central part for more organisations. It's becoming more important. It's going to become, in this external environment, a bit more the difference between success and failure than maybe it was when the world was a bit more stable. But you've got to find a way of doing that within the mesh of the people in the organisation and being a bit humble about it as well. You're going to be wrong much more than anyone else is wrong. Right? Strategy's wrong 50% of the time if you're lucky. And the ops manager can't be wrong 50% of the time. So we've got a lower success rate, but nonetheless, it's got to work. Right?
Yeah. And that's it. You have no strategy, you have no organisation to enact it. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you on. Before we leave, though, what would you like to leave the listeners to think about from this episode?
Gosh, there's been a lot, hasn't it? Firstly, apologies for careering across industries. It's a professional peccadillo doing what we do. Right?
I love it. We can learn a lot.
I think the thing for me is strategy is about giving people who have to make tough choices, giving them what they need. Sometimes that is being a bit of a counsellor, bluntly. Sometimes it's helping them have the right people who can support them. Sometimes it is about going, we've got better market information. Sometimes it's about helping them see and structure the decisions. It's whatever it needs. But for me, there is that, it is still about helping people. It's not about telling them, to your point about the PMO and all that stuff, I think. So I think if we can come out of this tough period with a lot of very, very excellent high-achieving strategists who know what the world is about, but use that to help people make decisions, I think we'll all be in a better place off the back of it.
Yeah, I love that. That really resonates, that sort of co-evolving sense of strategy. and not being dismissive, being open, have humility to listen. Yeah, I like that. So thank you so much for.
Thank you, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, the pleasure's all mine. I'll put your contact details at the bottom of your LinkedIn so people can reach out if they want to connect with you. But yeah, thank you so much for being on. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Cheers, mate.
Take care.
Take care.